Leo, we need to talk about your grandparents' inheritance. It's time to divide it fairly among the family. My mother's voice, Patricia, sounded too casual over the phone, as if she were asking me to stop by the grocery store. But I knew that tone. It was the same one she used when I was a child, moments before announcing that my younger brother, Jake, needed my room because it was bigger and he was growing up. I looked out the window of my Seattle apartment, watching the rain fall on the city. 3 weeks had passed since I married Amanda, and only 2 months since my maternal grandparents passed away, leaving me a $5 million inheritance. Split? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Mom, Grandpa, and Grandma left everything specifically to me. My name is Leo, I'm 30 years old, and for my entire life I've been taught that in the Harrison family, I was always the son who needed to learn the value of things. While Jake got new cars at 16, I worked double shifts at the gas station to pay for college. When he wanted to travel to Europe, my parents paid for his ticket, to broaden his horizons. When I mentioned my dream of getting a master's degree, my father simply said, "Money doesn't grow on trees, son." But my grandparents, Harold and Margaret, were different. In their cozy house on the Oregon coast, with views of the ocean and gardens that bloomed all summer long, I found the affection I lacked at home. I spent every weekend of my teenage years helping my grandfather fix fences and learning from my grandmother how to bake apple pies that were famous in the neighborhood. When their health began to decline, I was the one who took them to the doctor, organized their medications, and took care of their financial needs. Jake only showed up at Christmas for photos he posted on Instagram with captions about family being everything. Leo, my mother continued, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well, you know Jake is trying to start his own business. And we're worried about your father's retirement. $5 million is a lot of money for one person. Your grandparents would have wanted to help the whole family. I was silent for a moment, letting her words float in the air. What she didn't know was that I had anticipated this exact conversation 3 months ago when I saw Jake posting photos of the new BMW he won to celebrate his business degree, the same degree my parents paid for in full while I was still paying off student loans. "I'll think about it," I replied calmly, knowing that answer would leave her hopeful. "Great. Jake already has some ideas about investments. How about we meet up over the weekend?" I hung up the phone and smiled slightly. They really thought I would be the same Leo they always knew, the obedient son who gave in to keep the peace in the family. But what they didn't know was that a month before the wedding, while organizing the inheritance paperwork, I had made a decision that would change everything. I grabbed my laptop and opened the encrypted folder where I kept the documents for the irrevocable trust fund I had secretly created. Every penny of the inheritance was legally protected, out of the greedy hands of my family. But they didn't know that yet. And while they were planning how to divide what they thought was an easy inheritance, I was already 3 steps ahead, preparing them for the biggest lesson in consequences they had ever received. If you're enjoying seeing how some families show their true colors when money is involved, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this story is just getting started, and the twist that's coming will show you that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake of your life. 2 hours after my mother's call, my phone vibrated with a message from Jake. The photo showed him at the BMW dealership, posing next to a metallic blue convertible with the caption, "New toy arriving. Thanks Grandpa Harold #blessed #family first." He had posted this publicly on Instagram, tagging our entire family, including cousins and uncles. As if the inheritance was already his. My jaw clenched. Jake always had a knack for counting money that wasn't his. At 27, he still lived in our parents' house, drove a car they paid for, and his only work experience was helping out occasionally at my dad's hardware store, when he wasn't busy playing video games or hanging out with friends. When our grandparents were in the hospital for the last time, Jake showed up once. He stayed for 15 minutes, took a few selfies visiting family, and disappeared, claiming he had important things to do. I spent 3 weeks practically living at the hospital, holding my grandmother's hand as she fought pneumonia, organizing medical care, and making the difficult decisions no one else wanted to face. But now, magically, Jake saw himself as the rightful heir to $5 million. My father, Robert Harrison, was always more subtle in his favoritism, but no less damaging. He owned a thriving auto repair shop and always justified his choices with phrases like "Jake needs more guidance," or "You've always been more independent, Leo." Translation: Jake received generous allowances, and I had been working since I was 14. Patricia, my mother, was the orchestrator. A retired school administrator, She had a peculiar talent for turning any situation into a lesson in family responsibility. When Jake crashed his car at 18 while driving drunk, she convinced my father that buying him a new car was investing in family safety. When I needed help paying for college graduation, she said that struggles build character. The pattern was always the same: Jake got, I earned. Jake deserved, I learned. Jake was protected, I was prepared for real life. Now, sitting in my parents' living room that weekend, I watched the family dynamic unfold exactly as I had predicted. Patricia had prepared Jake's favorite lunch, lasagna and chocolate pie, while serving me a simple salad, because Amanda must be feeding you well now that you're married. So Leo, my father began, leaning forward in the leather armchair Jake had given me for Christmas with my borrowed money. Money that, of course, was never paid back. Your mother told me about your conversation. I think she's right about splitting the inheritance. Jake nodded vigorously, his mouth full of lasagna. Yeah, man. Like, 5 million is a lot of money for one person. And I already have an amazing business plan. I can triple that money in 2 years. What kind of plan? I asked, genuinely curious to hear my brother's latest fantasy. Cryptocurrencies and day trading, he said with the confidence of someone who has watched a few YouTube videos. My friend Tyler is already making $100,000 a month. I just need the initial capital. My mother smiled proudly. Jake's always been smart with money. Remember when he made $500 betting on the Super Bowl? She conveniently forgot to mention the $3,000 he lost betting on other games, money my parents covered, so he could learn from his mistakes. What about you, Leo? My father asked. What do you plan to do with your inheritance? It was a trick question. Any answer I gave would be used to justify why I didn't deserve the money on my own. If I said I wanted to invest it, they would argue that Jake had more experience. If I said I wanted to save it, they would say I was being selfish. If I said I wasn't sure, they would say Jake had a better plan. I'm looking at a few options, I replied vaguely. See. Patricia turned to my father. Leo doesn't even know what he wants to do. Jake has a clear plan. It's obvious the money would be better spent with him. It was at that moment that I realized how they had orchestrated this entire conversation. It wasn't a family discussion about inheritance. It was a planned intervention to convince me to voluntarily hand over $5 million to Jake. Besides, Jake added, wiping chocolate from his lips, you already have a stable job and a working wife. I'm still building my life. At 27, Jake was still building his life with our parents' financial resources, while I had paid for my own education, financed my own apartment, and built my career without a penny of family help. Grandpa and Grandma would have wanted the whole family to benefit, my mother continued, using the same manipulative tone she had used when we were children. They always talked about family unity. That was a blatant lie. My grandparents had been very clear about their feelings toward Jake. In private conversations with me, my grandmother often expressed concern about my brother's lack of responsibility, and the way my parents spoiled him. My grandfather, always blunt, once told me, Jake's a good kid, but he needs to learn that the world doesn't owe him anything. You've already learned that lesson. How about we split it 50-50, my father suggested, as if he were being generous. $2.5 million each. Fair and simple. I looked around the room, watching their hopeful expressions. They really believed I would just agree. That the obedient Leo would accept any arrangement that kept the family peace. I'll think about it, I said finally, getting up to leave. It won't take long to decide, Jake called as I walked toward the door. That BMW isn't going to buy itself. His laughter followed me to the car. Driving back to Seattle, I called Amanda and told her about lunch. She listened quietly before saying, Leo, you can't be seriously considering this. Of course not, I replied. But they don't know yet that the money is already protected. And the more time they spend planning how to spend $5 million they'll never have, the more painful the fall will be. What my family didn't know was that 3 months before my wedding, I had anticipated exactly this scenario. The irrevocable trust fund wasn't just a precaution, it was a carefully planned strategy. And now, while Jake was picking out cars and my mother was fantasizing about European vacations financed by my inheritance, I was already preparing the second phase of my plan. A phase that would show them, once and for all, the consequences of underestimating someone who learned early on that in this family, you can only count on yourself. The Monday after the family lunch, Jake showed up at my work. I was in a meeting with clients when my assistant, Rebecca, knocked on the conference room door. "Leo, sorry to interrupt, but your brother is at the front desk. He says it's urgent about family matters." My clients exchanged curious glances as I excused myself and left the room. Jake was standing in the lobby of the financial consulting firm where I worked, wearing ripped jeans and an expensive t-shirt, probably bought with our parents' credit card. His hair was messy, and he smelled like beer, even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. "We need to talk, bro," he said too loudly, drawing the attention of other employees. "Jake, I'm working. Can we talk later?" "No now." He stepped closer, his voice heavy with an aggression I had rarely seen. "I talked to Tyler. He said the crypto market is exploding, and if I don't get in the next few days, I'll miss the window. I need my share of the inheritance today." His share of the inheritance. As if the $5 million our grandparents left specifically for me was automatically his property. "Jake, I told you I'll think about it." "Think about it?" he laughed dismissively. "Dude, while you think about it, I'm losing thousands of dollars a day. Amanda already has a job, you two make good money. I need this chance to build my future." Rebecca and other colleagues pretended not to be listening, but I could feel their discreet glances. Jake was deliberately creating a scene at my workplace, trying to pressure me through public humiliation. "Let's talk outside," I muttered, guiding him toward the exit. "Why are you being so selfish?" Jake continued, his voice echoing down the hallway. "Mom said you've always been jealous of my potential. Is that it? You don't want me to succeed." I stopped on the sidewalk in front of the building, feeling anger rise for the first time in weeks. "Jake, you show up at my job, drunk in the middle of the afternoon, demanding $2.5 million that isn't his, and I'm the selfish one? They're mine too. We're family," he yelled, pointing his finger in my face. "You always thought you were better than me just because you work in a fancy office and wear a suit. But at the end of the day, you're just a failed accountant who can barely pay his own bills." The lie was so absurd I almost laughed. I made 6 times more than Jake had ever made in any job, if you could call his occasional projects jobs. "Jake, have you been drinking today? Don't change the subject." He was red now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool Seattle air. "Mom and Dad are right about you. You've always been a freeloader. When we were kids, you pretended to be the good one just to get attention from Grandma and Grandpa. And now you're stealing what should be ours." That was the last straw. Throughout our childhood, I had been the son who worked while Jake received an allowance. The son who saved while Jake spent. The son who visited our grandparents out of love, while Jake only showed up when he needed to borrow money. "Go home, Jake. You're making a fool of yourself." "I'm not leaving here until you give me an answer," he yelled, drawing even more attention from passersby. $2.5 million. That's all I'm asking. It's fair." That's when I realized this wasn't about money anymore. It was about power. Jake had never faced real consequences for his actions, never been denied something he wanted. And now, for the first time in his life, someone was saying no to him. "The answer is no, Jake." He stared at me for a few seconds, processing the words. Then, without warning, he pushed me hard in the chest. "You selfish son of a bitch." I staggered back but didn't fight back. Employees from my building watched from the windows, and a few people stopped on the sidewalk. Jake, realizing he'd crossed a line, took a step back. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice low and threatening. "The whole family will know what kind of person you really are." He turned and left, leaving me on the sidewalk with my rumpled suit and the certainty that things were about to get a lot worse. That night, Amanda found me sitting on the couch, still in my suit, staring at the wall. "How was Jake's surprise visit?" she asked, sitting down next to me. I told her about the scene at the office, about the threats and the shove. She listened quietly, her fingers intertwined with mine. "Leo, this isn't normal. Jake is acting like he's entitled to his grandparents' money. And his parents are letting him." "I know. What are you going to do?" It was the question I'd been avoiding. For 3 weeks, I'd been content to watch my family show their true colors, gathering evidence of their greed and manipulation. But now Jake had crossed a physical line. He'd humiliated me at my workplace. He'd threatened to make my life hell until he got what he wanted. "Amanda," I finally said, turning to face her. "Do you remember when I set up the trust fund and told you it was just a precaution?" She nodded. "Well, it wasn't just a precaution. It was the first step in a much bigger plan." I stood up and went to the office, returning with a thick folder. Inside were documents I had been organizing for months. Records of every loan my parents had given Jake that had never been repaid, evidence of the times they had borrowed money from relatives and disappeared with it, copies of conversations where Jake admitted he had no intention of paying back his debts. "What's all this?" Amanda asked, leafing through the documents. "It's the truth about the Harrison family. And when I'm done, Jake will never be able to manipulate anyone into giving him money again." My phone vibrated with a message from my cousin Daniel, my mother's sister's son. "Leo, your mother called me saying that you're refusing to help Jake with the inheritance. She's saying you've changed since the wedding and that Amanda is influencing you. Just wanted you to know that some people in the family are taking sides." I showed the message to Amanda. Her eyes narrowed. "They're trying to turn the whole family against you." "I know. My mother has always been an expert at that." I took a deep breath. But this time she's bitten off more than she can chew. I opened my laptop and started typing an email. The recipient was my lawyer Michael Chun, the same one who had helped set up the trust fund. "Michael, I need to expand our legal strategy. I have documentation of a pattern of financial fraud that spans more than a decade. Can we schedule a meeting to discuss legal options?" Amanda read over my shoulder. "Leo, are you sure? This will blow up your family." I looked at her, feeling a cold calm I hadn't experienced before. "Amanda, they already blew up our family when they decided that the $5 million my grandparents left me was theirs. Jake physically assaulted me today because I said no. My mother is spreading lies about you and me to relatives." I sent the email and closed the laptop. "I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm doing this because if I don't stop them now, they'll keep manipulating, lying, and intimidating anyone who has something they want." The phone rang. It was my mother. I looked at the name on the screen and smiled for the first time in hours. "Are you going to answer?" Amanda asked. "Not yet." I let it ring until it went to voicemail. "First, I'm going to let them hang themselves. And when they think they've won, then they'll find out what happens when you underestimate someone who's learned to play their game better than they can." On voicemail, my mother's voice echoed through the room. "Leo, you need to call back immediately. Jake told me about your fight today. This has turned into a very serious situation, and if you don't cooperate, we're going to have to take more drastic measures. Her family has always been there for you, and it's time to give back." Amanda looked at me with concern. "Drastic measures?" I smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. They still don't understand that I took all the necessary measures months ago. And now, every desperate move they make will only make the fall more painful. As I deleted the voicemail without returning the call, I realized I had crossed my own point of no return. This was no longer about protecting my grandparents' legacy. It was about teaching my family a lesson they would never forget about the consequences of treating people like disposable resources. And this time, they were going to learn it the hard way. Michael Chun had a reputation for being the most meticulous lawyer in Seattle when it came to complex family disputes. His office on the 32nd floor offered a panoramic view of the city, but on that Thursday morning, my attention was completely focused on the documents scattered across his mahogany desk. "Leo, this is more serious than you realize," Michael said, adjusting his glasses as he examined the papers I had organized. "We have a pattern of financial fraud here that spans more than a decade." He held up one of the photocopies I had made years ago, a $15,000 loan my parents had taken out from my Aunt Margaret in 2015, supposedly to expand Robert's workshop. The workshop was never expanded, and my aunt never saw a penny of it back. "This isn't a common family squabble over inheritance," Michael continued. "Jake signed bank documents using his name as guarantor for loans he never intended to repay. His parents facilitated these transactions, knowing that Jake didn't have sufficient income. Legally speaking, this constitutes conspiracy to commit bank fraud." I picked up another document from the pile. "And this?" Michael scanned it quickly. It was a copy of the lease for Jake's apartment in Portland, the apartment he claimed to have bought with his savings. In reality, my parents had used my paternal grandmother, Dorothy, as a guarantor, taking advantage of her early dementia to get her to sign papers she didn't understand. Elder financial abuse, Michael muttered. Leo, with this documentation, I can do much more than simply protect her inheritance. I can ensure that they face criminal consequences. It was exactly what I had hoped to hear. For the previous 3 years, while Jake racked up debt and my parents perpetuated their financial manipulation schemes, I had been quietly documenting everything. Not out of paranoia, but out of experience. I knew that eventually they would try to include me in their fraudulent schemes or blame me for their failures. What's your recommendation? I asked. Michael leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. First, we're going to strengthen the protection of your inheritance. The trust fund is solid, but we can add extra layers of legal security that will make any future challenge impossible. He picked up a pen and began jotting down notes. Second, we'll use this evidence to build a preventive case. If they try to sue you or continue the smear campaign, we'll have enough ammunition to not only defend ourselves, but to counterattack with devastating force. And third? I asked, knowing there would be a third point. Third, Michael smiled for the first time since the meeting began, we're going to give them one last chance to back down voluntarily. An official letter detailing exactly what we know and the legal consequences they will face if they continue to press forward. Some criminals are smart enough to stop when they see the abyss ahead. And if they're not smart enough, then you'll have the satisfaction of watching justice be served in a very public and very permanent way. I left Michael's office with a clear plan of action and, for the first time in weeks, a sense of complete control over the situation. But before implementing anything, I needed to test how far my family was willing to go. The opportunity came that same evening. Amanda and I were having dinner at home when my phone rang. It was Jake, and this time his voice didn't carry the aggression of our meeting in my office. Instead, he sounded desperate. Leo bro, I need to talk to you. It's about the inheritance, but it's different now. What happened, Jake? I made some bad bets. Cryptocurrencies, you know? Tyler said it was a sure thing, but, his voice trembled. I lost everything. Even the money Mom and Dad lent me for the car. Amanda raised her eyebrows, listening to my half of the conversation. How much did you lose, Jake? 30,000. The answer came in a whisper. And it gets worse. I borrowed money from some guys in Portland. They're charging 20% interest a month, and if I don't pay them by the end of the week. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake had gotten involved with loan sharks. Jake, why don't you go to our parents? They don't have that kind of money. Dad's garage can barely pay the bills, and Mom used her retirement to cover the credit card debt. His voice rose an octave. Leo, you're my only hope. I just need 30,000 from the inheritance. It's a ridiculous amount compared to 5 million. I closed my eyes, processing the information. Jake wasn't just asking for money, he was revealing that my family's financial situation was even worse than I had imagined. They were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. Jake, I'll think about it. But I need a few days. Leo, I don't have a few days. These guys are serious. Then you should have thought about that before betting money you didn't have, I replied coldly. I'll call you tomorrow. I hung up before he could respond. Amanda looked at me with concern. Leo, you're not considering giving him money, are you? Of course not. But now I know exactly how desperate they are. I grabbed my laptop and opened a new document. And desperate people make even bigger mistakes. I spent the next night crafting a plan that Michael had called an irresistible bait trap. I would send an email to my entire family, including Jake, announcing that I had decided to reconsider the division of the inheritance and was willing to discuss a fair settlement. The meeting would be scheduled for Michael's office the following Saturday, supposedly to sign partial transfer documents. What they wouldn't know was that Michael would be recording the entire conversation and that any admission of fraud or blackmail would be legally recorded. Are you sure they'll reveal their true intentions? Amanda asked, reading the draft email over my shoulder. Amanda, you don't know my family like I do. When they smell easy money, they lose all caution. Jake is desperate because of the loan sharks, my parents are broke, and they all believe I'm the same obedient son I've always been. I clicked send, and the email was fired off to 7 different addresses, my parents, Jake, 2 uncles, my cousin, and my cousin Daniel. The replies started coming in within 15 minutes. Jake, man. I knew you'd do the right thing. I can't wait for Saturday. My mom, I'm so proud of you, Leo. This is the decision your grandparents would have wanted. My dad, I always knew you were a real family man. Each response confirmed exactly what I had hoped. They were so focused on the money that they didn't question why I had changed my mind so drastically, or why the meeting would be at a lawyer's office they had never met. On Friday night, the night before the meeting, I got an unexpected call from my cousin Daniel. Leo, can I ask you a weird question? Sure. Your mother called me today, sounding kind of nervous, asking if I knew of any way to transfer money to offshore accounts quickly. She said she was asking for a friend, but, he paused. Man, that didn't sound like something someone asks out of curiosity. My jaw clenched. Did she say anything else? She mentioned something about Jake needing to get out of the country quickly, after Saturday. Leo, what's going on? I hung up the phone with a crystal-clear understanding that the situation was even more serious than I had anticipated. My family wasn't just planning to steal my inheritance, they were planning to flee the country with it. If you've been following this story of family greed and want to see how people who are supposed to love us are capable of betraying us for the most sordid reasons, subscribe to the channel, because what happened at that Saturday meeting exposed truths that changed my life forever. That night, I called Michael and updated him on our plan. Michael, they're not just trying to rob me. They're planning to flee the country. Leo, his voice was grave, that turns a case of family fraud into capital flight and money laundering. If we can get evidence of intent to flee, I can get the FBI involved. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For 3 decades, I had been the son who gave in, who kept the peace, who sacrificed his own interests for the good of the family. But the next day, for the first time in my life, my family would find out who I really was when I stopped pretending to be who they wanted me to be. And when they found out, it would be too late to turn back. The meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning. By 6, I was awake, wearing my best suit and reviewing one last time every document, every recording, every piece of evidence that would turn what they thought was an easy victory into the complete destruction of everything they had built at the expense of others. Jake had sent me a message at 2 in the morning. Can't wait to start our business partnership, brother. Business partnership. As if the $5 million my grandparents had left specifically for me was the startup capital for a family business. But while Jake dreamed of new cars and my mother researched offshore accounts, I finalized preparations for the moment that would define not only my future, but the fate of every person who thought they could manipulate, steal from, or intimidate me. The real lesson about family was about to begin. The meeting began at exactly 9 in the morning in Michael Chen's office. Jake arrived first, wearing a cheap suit he had clearly bought the day before, his eyes red from a sleepless night. My parents followed, my mother carrying a bulky briefcase and my father nervously checking his cell phone. Where are the transfer documents? Jake asked before even sitting down, his anxiety overflowing. Patience, Michael replied calmly, adjusting the small, discreet camera that would capture the entire conversation. First, we need to clarify some legal issues. For 20 minutes, I watched my family reveal their true intentions. Jake openly admitted that he intended to use the money for high-risk investments and to pay off some urgent loans. My mother detailed how they planned to set up offshore accounts for tax protection. My father casually mentioned that Jake might need to travel for a while after the transfer. Every word was recorded. Very good, Michael said finally. Now that we understand your intentions, I have a few questions. That's when he laid out on the table the evidence I had collected over years. Bank documents showing fraudulent loans, forged contracts, financial exploitation records of my grandmother Dorothy. The color drained from Jake's face. What the fuck is this? Evidence of a pattern of financial fraud stretching back over a decade, Michael replied coldly. Leo, would you like to explain? I stood up slowly, watching their expressions of shock and growing panic. Jake, did you really think I didn't know about the loan sharks? Mom, did you think I wouldn't find out about the offshore accounts you researched? My mother opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. Leo, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that there is no inheritance for you to divide. I grabbed a folder and dumped copies of the trust fund documents on the table. These are the papers for the irrevocable trust one set up 3 months before the wedding. Every penny is legally protected. Jake jumped out of his chair. You son of a bitch. You tricked us. I protected the money my grandparents left me, I replied calmly. You tried to steal it from me using forged documents, emotional blackmail, and now you plan to flee the country with $5 million. Michael stood up, his expression professional but relentless. Gentlemen, this conversation has been recorded with legal consent. The evidence of bank fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to launder money will be turned over to the appropriate authorities later today. You can't do this to us, my mother screamed. We're your family. Family doesn't try to steal an inheritance with forged documents, I replied. Family doesn't plan to flee the country with stolen money. And family certainly doesn't use a grandmother's dementia to defraud contracts. Jake lunged at me, but Michael pressed a button on the intercom. Security, please. Within seconds, 2 security guards entered the room. Jake, Michael said calmly, any physical assault will be added to the criminal charges. My brother stopped, trembling with rage and despair. Leo, the loan sharks are going to kill me. You should have thought of that before betting money you didn't have and then trying to steal from me. As they were escorted out, shouting threats and accusations, I remained seated, feeling a calm I hadn't experienced in years. Michael closed the door and turned to me. Leo, in 30 years on the job, I've rarely seen anyone document evidence with such precision. The district attorney's office will have a solid case. The phone rang. It was Special Agent Sarah Williams of the FBI, who Michael had contacted about the attempted capital flight. Mr. Chen? We intercepted Jake Carter trying to buy tickets to Mexico with a stolen credit card. He's in custody. I looked out the office window, watching my parents walk toward the car, their figures dwindling in the distance. For the first time in 3 decades, I wasn't worried about keeping the peace or giving in to avoid conflict. I had learned the difference between true family and people who simply share your DNA. And that lesson, painful as it was, set me completely free. 6 months later, I received an unexpected call from Agent Williams. Leo, I thought you'd like to know, Jake has been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for attempted bank fraud and money laundering. His parents accepted a plea bargain. They'll pay $150,000 in restitution and do 600 hours of community service. I closed my eyes, feeling not triumph, but a deep calm. What about the loan sharks? Jake cooperated fully. The organization has been dismantled, and he's in witness protection. I hung up the phone and walked out onto the balcony of my Seattle apartment. Amanda was watering the plants we had bought together, small pots of lavender that reminded me of my grandparents' garden. News on the case? She asked, without looking up from the flowers. Closed. Definitely. During those 6 months, my life had changed in ways I never anticipated. Without the constant pressure of family manipulation, I discovered who I really was when I didn't have to constantly defend myself or justify my choices. The inheritance money remained untouched in the trust fund. Michael had suggested that I start using the income for personal projects, but I didn't feel ready yet. For now, knowing that I was protected was enough. The most significant transformation wasn't financial, but emotional. For 3 decades, I had operated under the belief that family meant tolerating any behavior, forgiving any betrayal, sacrificing anything to keep the peace. Discovering that I was wrong was simultaneously devastating and liberating. Amanda approached, wiping the dirt from her hands. Do you regret anything? I reflected on the question. I regret taking so long to set boundaries. I regret allowing them to treat me like a disposable resource for so long. What about exposing everything? The consequences for them? No. My answer came without hesitation. Jake physically assaulted me demanding money that wasn't his. My parents planned to flee the country with stolen inheritance money. They tried to use an elderly woman's dementia to defraud contracts. These weren't impulsive choices. It was a systematic pattern of exploitation that lasted for years. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from prison. It was from Jake, just 3 lines. Leo, I know you won't forgive me, and I understand. I just wanted to say that you were right about me. I hope you're happy. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because I recognized that some chapters need to be closed completely. My parents never tried to contact me directly, but I learned through cousins that they had moved to another state, claiming that Seattle had too many painful memories. The version they spread to the extended family was that I had changed completely after the marriage and that Amanda had turned me against them. Some people believed it. Others, who knew the family history, just shook their heads knowingly. On the first anniversary of my grandparents' death, Amanda and I drove to the beach house. The garden was a little wild, but the roses still bloomed vibrantly against the salty ocean breeze. I sat on the porch where my grandfather used to read the morning paper, watching the waves that seemed unchanging, regardless of how many human dramas unfolded on land. "You did the right thing," I whispered, as if he could hear me. "Thank you for trusting me." In that moment, I understood that protecting the inheritance had never really been about money. It was about honoring the trust someone had placed in me, protecting the memory of people who loved me unconditionally, and finally learning that setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's survival. Amanda joined me on the porch, intertwining our fingers. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that for the first time in 30 years, I'm not worried about what my family is going to say or do. I'm not calculating how to keep the peace or avoid conflict. I'm just free." If this story about toxic family and the importance of setting boundaries touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel, because unfortunately, there are many people who need to learn that loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to destroy your life. 6 months after that afternoon on the porch, I opened a financial consulting firm specializing in family wealth protection. My clients are people who, like me, have learned that sometimes protecting what you love means protecting it from those you love. Jake still has a year and a half left in prison. My parents are still paying restitution. And me? Well, I finally learned that real family is the one who sticks around when you set healthy boundaries, not the one who disappears when you stop sacrificing yourself for their whims. The last lesson my grandparents taught me was the most valuable one of all. Never let anyone make you believe that protecting your own well-being is selfish. It's actually the only way to have something truly valuable to share with those who deserve it.